Welcome back, guys. So we're here on the new School Sensei podcast. So I'm the host, Lance Douglas. As you heard just before, we have Scott Sievewright. So he runs one of the top MMA coaching podcasts at the moment. He's one of the leaders in our industry. So, he's doing a lot of great things. Personally, I've learned a lot from you. You've got a lot of the hard science, the white papers, and then through your learning, kind of, I won't say dumbing it down, but bringing it down to a level where, your average Joe can understand. I think that's where you kind of bridge the gap, Steve. So that's awesome you're doing that. Now let's run through. We had the big debate. Big Dan versus Greg Souders. So, Scott, let me know, what were your thoughts on that big debate?
I wasn't particularly surprised. So I thought it was a shit show. I thought it was always going to be a shit show. And Greg's in a tough place, right? I know I come off as defending Greg a lot on this, but I was thinking today, we're talking about, he's accused of using, being too verbose and using all these fancy words, but these are just the words that are in the space that we're trying to discuss. And I think it'd be akin to you trying to have a discussion about jiu-jitsu with someone who has no idea what jiu-jitsu is. It would be difficult without using jiu-jitsu words. So I give Greg a massive pass on that. I actually think he's a good communicator. I think he's very direct, but he's to layer on to what you were saying about me than the average Joe. I'm more of the average Joe. I don't have the capability to articulate the science like Josh and Greg. So that's sometimes a blessing, right? So the way I
100%.
speak about it just seems a bit more everyday, man. And that's not my necessarily. That's just how it is. It's just how I talk.
Yeah, definitely. I thought, because I know it was touted as the big debate. I remember doing debates in high school and they ran a lot differently. Typically, you'd have an opening statement, then you would have a rebuttal, and then a closing statement. So I was thinking it was going to be a proper debate with a proper moderator.
I didn't have these high
definitely
hopes.
Wasn't the case.
I did not have these high hopes. Again, Greg was challenged, and he came on to do what he does. And a couple of things to say about it. I try and choose my words carefully as I go here. Dan's a young guy, right? He's exceptional at what he does. He is his job is just to go out and smash and be the best competitor he can be. And he's young, right? So I tend to think that his ignorance really is somewhat forgivable. It's not his job to learn and know all about this. It is kind of peculiar that he would shit on something he quite clearly doesn't understand. But hey, again, I think ignorance is generally forgivable. What was curious to me, Tom, obviously an effective coach, he knows what he's doing. He's been around a long time. What was interesting to me is when Greg gave him the opportunity a couple of times to say, listen, if you were presented with evidence that said there's a better way of doing it, would you do it? And Tom pushed back on that pretty hard a couple of times and said he just couldn't not believe that the drilling was an important aspect. So that to me, again, I'm trying to be careful what I say here, but that to me is a bit more willfully ignorant, I think. And I think that's less forgivable. It wasn't, so to recap that, I don't think it's Big Dan's job and to know all the ins and outs and intricacies of the science we're talking about. I think that lands more on Tom.
Yeah, Tom came in pretty emotional, but I think a lot of it is because he really cares about coaching. So
Sure.
He sounds a lot like, how I would have sounded maybe like, 5-10 years ago. Saying a lot of the same stuff, talking about, all the champs are drilling. So that's a big, we'll get into all the arguments. So champs are drilling. How can we, how can we progress the sport without passing knowledge through the generations? Det was saying that a lot. And then just I guess, not knowing what ecological dynamics is. And ecological dynamics, to be honest, it is a very difficult thing to explain. And the one thing I would have liked Greg to do was to clearly define ecological dynamics at the start. I think that would have helped a lot.
Well, maybe I'll have a stab at that. And before I go into that, though, this is where I kind of can sympathize or be understanding to the point about Tom, right? Or any coach. Coaching is wearing a whole bunch of hats, right? The skill acquisition part of it is just one of the hats. And it's like a primary objective of training, presumably. but there's loads of things going on. And there's the, group dynamics. It's the way you talk to people. It's how you cue, the level of instruction, all this kind of stuff. So just being a manager and trying to create, healthy, thriving human beings, right? So it's a really tough job. Skill acquisition is only a small part of that. So can you be an effective coach without knowing the nitty-gritty of the science? Absolutely. Absolutely can. Can you be a better coach if you start to get your head around some of these concepts and pick a side and pick a theory and understand it? I think that's also correct, if that makes sense. So you can absolutely be a terrific, fantastic, effective coach without knowing the theory. I think the theory helps.
That's it. And so you want to take a stab at just simply defining ecological dynamics. Pretend maybe I've dropped out of, maybe high school at 14, 15. I'm a homeschool kid. Explain it to me.
Here we go. All right. This is off the cuff. So ecological dynamics is a theory of human behavior. And it's actually a marriage of two different things, ecological psychology and dynamical systems theory. Now, the study of ecology generally means that, or what the study of ecology is studying how living things interact with other living things in an environment. That's what the study of ecology is. So it's really looking at the big picture. How, or I'll use the word organism, but like grapplers, or how human beings, how they interact with other human beings in an environment around a shared task. That's what ecological psychology is all about, understanding that. Did that help? Or was that
Definitely, yeah.
So,
it's good how you talked about, I like hearing about the two terms, you got the ecological side and then you got dynamical systems. Makes sense, ecological dynamics from those two theories kind of merging together.
Right, so the first part, we say ecology is just the study of how big systems interact and things within the systems, how they all interact and the relationships between the systems. That's pretty much what ecological psychology is. The dynamic systems part just means that it takes living things which are very, very complex and adaptive, and they change and they learn and that over time. And it's really to appreciate the complexity in that and how systems behave, and especially when you put two systems or two people together, how they behave, the interactions and what kind of the behaviors and the strategies and the movements and everything that come out from that. So ecological psychology is looking at the big picture of how human beings react within their environment, and the dynamic side is just appreciates how these complex systems, which are people, how they tend to behave over time. You put them both together and it's ecological dynamics. And that's just an umbrella term for the kind of theory and theoretical framework that a lot of these newer kind of coaches or more recent coaches are talking about. So,
yeah, no, that makes sense. How would you simply explain? Because I know for me, to understand ecological dynamics, I think of a lot of the theory of direct perception and indirect perception. From my understanding, direct perception, so if you follow the ecological dynamics theory, so direct perception is where you can get information from the environment and that's enough to act upon. Whereas if you're a more traditional coach, you would believe that information from the environment is not enough and that needs to be filtered through some mental models that you've created previously, and then you can act upon it. Yeah, that's kind of how I've kind of got my head around it. How does that sound?
I think you've summed it up pretty much perfectly. So we have this kind of linear thing going on. Of course, it feeds back on each other, but from the information processing approach or indirect perception means that our environment's not telling us the whole picture, and it comes in and presumably our nervous system, our brain does all these calculations and whatnot, and then selects appropriate action, and then rinse and repeat. What the ecological theories suggest that we're not removing this thinking part, but it's actually part of the cycle. So everything, not so much, it's not that we're seeing the world the way it is, but the way we are uniquely wired to interact with our world. And I think that's a better way of looking at it. So it means that what's out there, at least for us, is reliable and it's real. And we don't need to do any extra inference or calculations or whatnot. Now, I'm not 100% sold on it. There's some conflicting theories, guys that talk about my man John Mackey and whatnot, deeply in active inference theory, predictive processing. So there's a spanner in the works there for me. But what I like to look at these two big theories is that there's a huge overlap. They still, we can talk a bit about that too. They still really respect tight perception action coupling. And of course, they believe that we self-organize around behaviors and tasks. Now I'm getting buzzwordy, and I promised myself I wouldn't do that.
No, that's all good. I think if in the debate, if Greg was able to just clearly define it and then get, Dan and Tom both on board, I think it would have been a much more productive exercise. Because it's hard to say, like, you can't really say who won the debate. Because they didn't clearly define the terms. I think it'd be just a draw.
Right, and but it's tough, right? Because it's two different conversations going on. They're speaking from completely different levels, and again, that's somewhat forgivable. But the other side challenged Greg, so yeah, it's tough. I didn't expect it to be any better, but they can never really get off that starting block because I don't think it was Greg's job to come in to define everything. I would have assumed if you were challenging Greg to debate, you might have done at least some superficial homework before that. That's all.
Yeah. I guess maybe in the next one, maybe Scott, you can jump in. You and Greg versus a couple of guys.
well, Greg runs circles around me, and just to layer onto this, some of the pushbacks is this ecological stuff for lazy coaches. I can't possibly see how that's a perception. People who are looking into this stuff are generally curious. They're trying to be the best coaches they can. So laziness is not a charge I accept.
Yeah, definitely not for the lazy coach. I know for me, last night, I was thinking about how to explain ecological dynamics for about an hour. So I watched, some Rob Gray videos. I was going through my head, like literally for an hour, how would I just explain what I do? And then thinking back as me as a coach 10 years ago, there would have been none of that. It would have been, okay, what technique am I going to teach? We got body locks, perfect. Okay, am I going to go tight waist? Am I going to go locked hands, long arm, short arm? So I think, yeah, for people to say that, being an eco coach is means you're a lazy coach, I think that's definitely not true.
I think another thing that more the traditionalists or people maybe that are not into the space, they talk about learners as if they're these like empty vessels and they're just there and it's up to the coach to pour everything into them. But they don't appreciate that they're active participants. They're making their own meaning. They're living their own experience and their own interaction and their own reality. And that's really, really important. And I think that gets left out. I think from the traditional models, it was always, let's really focus on the task, right? The techniques and stuff. And we don't need to worry too much about the environment. I think there's maybe a danger coming in with this ecological approach. Let's just concentrate on the environment and maybe the task. But I still think we need to really appreciate that the learner themselves, that they're very much an active part of all this. And when you start thinking about it in this way and just appreciating what the theory and the framework is actually telling us, not that the coach isn't important, but the role radically changes. And that's the kind of message we're trying to get out.
Yeah. More of it's kind of student-led, the practice, instead of the teacher-led. The teacher's at the top, barking orders. And I think, both ways can work, to be honest. You got John Danaher, I've bought a lot of his instructionals. I've learned a lot from him, and he's got the top-down approach, and it works. But whereas you can get a student-led approach, the stuff that Greg's doing, and that works as well. So I think if they talked about in the debate that, to be honest, like everything works, it's just to a degree that it works, and it depends on the athlete as well. Because I know from my experience, like I've tried to push with some athletes, constraints-led approach, and they absolutely hate it. And then they just end up quitting, moving to a different school. Okay. So some people are just not ready for it. So if they're not ready, say, Tom, I'm sure he's an excellent coach. I've bought a couple of his instructionals, and his room, they probably love what he's doing. So if they love it, they're getting better. I can see why. What's the point of changing? What's the point of experimenting, researching a different way? If it ain't broke, why fix it?
Right, and to your point about the top down versus bottom up, and that's the kind of contrasting concepts of the approaches, right? Top down assumes you are the centralized coaching position. They're going to deliver the knowledge, and you're going to build from there. The ecological approach is really a lens to look things through. So regardless of how practice is designed or structured at all, we can still look at it through an ecological lens. So and there's certain things in practice that this is what we're pushing back against, that they don't align, or they conflict with what the framework and the theory are telling us, and that's what we're trying to shift practice more towards. I used to be overly zealous, I think, about the prescriptive stuff and that, but it's a tool within the box, and it's not. This is a misconception, I think, of the ecological approach, that these are things that are precluded, they're excluded. You're never allowed to step in and show someone or do a quick drill or anything. And I don't think that's very fair. I think it's causing an unnecessary friction, and I think it's not borne out by the data and the research anyway. So what Greg's doing, which I really appreciate, I'm doing it somewhat for myself, is saying, look, if we can control for the prescriptive stuff and the drilling and the static stuff and the isolated movements by removing it all, then we can really see if what we're talking about is working. I'm coming to the stage now, well, maybe we can sneak a little bit back in, but that's not me backtracking. That just means given a certain circumstance or a certain issue, or that is a way we can move the ball further and quicker for our athletes and our learners, which we want to do as coaches. And so I allow myself a little bit of flexibility. That allows me also a little bit by maybe if the ecological dynamics isn't the full picture, it provides me a bit of wiggle room, you know?
Yeah, I like how you talked about, it's that lens you view your coaching practice. I know of me, I started pretty hard with all the eco and constraints-led approach, but recently I've started bringing back some dead drilling, particularly in the gi, because we've just started, as a team, we're playing more spider and lasso guard, and our fingers are just not conditioned. So we use the dead drilling at the start of the session just to literally warm up our fingers. And then we also use it just to build the endurance in our lower back and our legs. So I tell them beforehand, I just tell them, this isn't a technique, guys. We're literally warming up our fingers and we're building the endurance in our lower back and legs. And since we've started that, my guys are starting to play a bit more spider guard just purely because the fingers have the endurance now. So I can see there's definitely a place for even static drilling.
Right. And one of the questions I really wish was asked yesterday is for the advocates of static drilling. And maybe ask this question to you. Sorry to put you on the spot. What do you think is going on there?
Yeah, the way I'm doing static drilling, it's purely to guide the students' attention to certain details. So maybe I've got another coach, he did a lot of loose passing in the gi. And for us, because a lot of us are no-gi guys, we just didn't know where to grab the gi. So he's drawing our attention, you can grab on the outside of the knees. The issue there is they can get a spider guard pretty easily. So grab a bit lower on the gi. You can grab one leg pant, so you only got one spider hook access to. So for us, it's purely just guiding the students' attention. And then the other factors would be, with the loose passing, we're using it to build our endurance. So I tell them, let's go hard, guys. This is endurance. Like, you guys aren't going to the gym, so we're doing a quick 10-minute gym workout.
Yeah, and again, there's all these things that tack on and come along for the ride. So I guess just to maybe add on to my question, what do we think is going on with drilling? Okay, so, and I grant you that. I think that's, again, I'm not trying to change the way I talk about things, but inevitably I've come back to saying, where can I steel man the argument for drilling? And by steel man, I mean, where can we find value in it? And I think you're right. Okay, I think it can absolutely guide the intention and attention. That is what they're actually trying to do, and maybe things they should be looking for.
Yeah, but sorry, man, I've got a bit of glare over here.
I know.
The sun's just come out. I've got a bit of glare. It's all good.
Keep it to yourself.
And that's one of the key things I stole of you, is that, that key phrase, guiding the students' intention and attention. I think if a lot of people, like, before they criticize the ecological approach, if they just learned you can do that, then it make everyone's life a lot easier.
Yeah. So there's an upside and a downside to that, right? It can give students a general idea again, with their intention or what they're trying to achieve here and how that might be achieved. I think when we get too prescriptive or too technical or too detailed on it, it can create, I would say, like almost like a myopia, because you must see this all the time. If you give a bunch of details or any too specific or nuanced here, they're now getting caught up. What should I do? What did coach say? Is this right or is that right? And I don't think that's very helpful. So I like to think of our drilling, our maybe static drill or low resistance activities as maybe a demonstration or a quick intro to what we're trying to achieve. I like to keep them pretty sparse, more of a fill in the blanks kind of thing, because I ultimately believe, and I think that's what the ecological approach is telling us, that learning is a process of exploration and trial and error.
I like Kabir Bath. He kind of terms it as just a quick fit test. So say if, I go to the local shop, here in Australia, Bunnings, I get a drill. Before I'm going to start drilling holes in the wall, I'm just going to play around for it a little bit, make sure you got a handle, check the drill bits all good, turn it on and off. And the same thing is, if we're working, loose passing, you just want the students get a bit of a feel for it, especially in the gi, because it can be a bit different. Because a lot of people aren't used to, grabbing the gi.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. And I know it can sound like a bit of a backtrack that I'm sneaking this back in or saying there's value. I'm saying I think there is a value. It's just, there's an interesting discussion what the value is. I spoke with Nicola Hodges. She is a professor of sports science over in the UK. And she was speaking exclusively about demonstrations and show and tell kind of things. And she was saying what the research is showing is sparse is generally better. And I think that just was a better way of me saying, let them fill in the blanks a little bit. Let there still be a little bit of exploration, trial and error, creativity, and autonomy in there.
Yep. Let's talk through some points from the big debate. Maybe you can, have a yarn about them. So Big Dan kept talking about, from what I heard, is a lot about knowledge being passed through the generations. So what are your thoughts on, if you run an ecological approach to your practice, reinventing the wheel? Because he did say that a few times. Whereas a student, it shouldn't be their role to reinvent the wheel. The coach should be there to help, guide them and facilitate them.
Okay, so when I say something's either a misrepresentation, that could very well be because we haven't done a good enough job of presenting it. So I agree with it. I'm going to, sorry to answer your questions with other questions, but we don't really know. And I think that if you were really listening to Greg yesterday, he can maybe come across as he knows it all. Greg continually says, we do not really know what's going on. We can't ever really know what's going on. Back to the systems dynamics, the complex dynamics systems part of it, that's what it's telling us. We don't really know. We have some ideas that this is probably going to work better than other things, and that's the space that we're playing in at the moment. So I would ask anyone who thinks we're at the peak of knowledge now and everything we're doing is optimized, okay, how long should your round be? If you're static drilling, how many reps? How many details? No one has the answer for that. Everyone's doing it differently. And so this approach is a different way of parsing out and having a better idea of what's more or less effective.
Yep. Yeah, it is hard when people come in and say that they definitely know, or this is the optimal, the best way. For me, I'm thinking, it's probably, you can't be that sure. If you're so sure, then I don't think you've really done enough research, because the more you learn about something, to be honest, the less you kind of realize you know about it.
Right. And I think Dan maybe made that. Now, generally speaking, as more people get into the sport and the level of skill rises, it's going to lift all boats, right? But I don't think it's necessarily the case that that's always towards a better place or more skillful. Generally it is, but if you look at maybe traditional karate and other traditional martial arts, it's kind of worked the opposite way, right? They've watered it down so much that it's lost a lot of the skillful aspect of that. I don't think it's come into grappling and it's taken off in grappling, of course, but I think grappling was always going to be a tough sell, because grappling and jiu-jitsu and BJJ, they were always very live sports, real authentic live sports. I think when it came to the States, perhaps, and again, I'm just speculating here, that, they have to package it and market it. And that's where, somewhere along the line, we got the the shrimping and lines and the bear crawls and the 3 techniques and the 2 rolls at the end. And that was the standardized package. I don't think it's effective. There's an interesting thing going on in these discussions that, that doesn't happen anywhere. It happens everywhere. It happens everywhere. I was at a gym in Mexico last week. It's exactly the same thing. So this revisionist kind of history that's going on, that no one does that, and this is a caricature, I beg to differ.
Yeah. Because Big Dan, he was big on, knowledge has to be passed down. I feel like if Greg just mentioned that the coach could guide the student's intention and attention, that's one way knowledge would get passed down. If he just said that and explained, I think that would have cleared up a lot for Big Dan.
Yeah. And again, I'm not speaking for Greg, but I think I know him enough to say that Greg's done a lot of the work. I mean, thousands and thousands of hours, right? So we can get the fact that he's been lazy or... another thing, I don't want to turn into the Greg thing, but Greg came from Team Lloyd Irvin, right? Which was highly repetition. Easy for me to say. High. He talks about this a lot. What Greg had done, and again, he talks about this, something wasn't clicking for him, and he went and he thought, I'm going to throw myself into the research. If the research had said, actually, the best way to get skillful is just do these strict repetition, and actually, this is hypothetical, right? But all the live stuff that you do, that's actually that's counterproductive, because it's actually it's destabilizing these motor patterns, whatever the science. This is like a alternative fucking universe thing, right? So if you were to come out to the community and say, listen, this live work that you're doing it's not that helpful. All you need to do is drill, and then when you show up in competition, it should appear. If that was the case, and again, we're speaking hypothetically, Greg would have had a much easier job, because he could have just went into the high drilling. That's marketable, right? This is another charge which is peculiar to me, that we're just trying to market and sell things. I don't know how you can sell this. That's the problem. People have been in this ecological space for a while. It's not easy to sell, because your ecosystem and your relationships with your students are completely different. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all, and that's, again, what the approach is telling us. But just say Greg had come through that system, and he was advocating for getting rid of most of the live play and just doing drilling, we'd have the same counter-argument saying, well, look at the top teams. They do a lot of live stuff, and we're back to square one. So I don't know what to say about it. Greg is a blessing and a curse, because he's brought a lot of people into the space, but he is an absolutist, and I can respect that in many ways, but I can also see why it chaps people's ass.
Yeah. I think from listening to the pod, I've never actually talked to Greg in person, but from listening to his podcast, it seems like he's kind of softened and got better at kind of selling ecological dynamics. I know initially it was pretty abrupt, and now he's kind of, he's even using, words like games and things like that. So he's getting better at communicating, but it is a really tough sell, especially people who are so invested in, the traditional approach.
Yeah, and I don't want to pull the kind of egghead card, but Greg's constantly in these conversations with academics and sports science and stuff. It's just how we talk. It's not translating very well or into the general community, and that's a problem. And you're right, Greg's softening and evolving as he goes too with his message.
Yeah. Scott, I wanted to ask, do you watch or listen to any instructionals anymore?
I'm not sure I ever did.
Okay. Yep.
I'm not sure I ever did. Could have been in this space for a while now. My understanding of fighting deepens every day when I'm just observing and watching and seeing what goes on. And I think that sounds, really, like I'm too good for instructors. That I'm not. I'll occasionally use it. The other thing, and I talk about this a lot, we are just, if the algorithms are going to smash in your face every day anyway, new moves, new styles, new things. This is, again, the ecosystem that we're in. All this information is flooding into us at all times, whether we like it or not. And the environment that we've created here at my gym is taken some time, but we now have this, which I feel is a vibrant ecosystem where everyone's coming in, they're sharing ideas, they're trying new stuff, they've got a lot of autonomy, and what I'm seeing is a lot of kind of creativity and fast development coming through.
I know for me, I like looking at instructionals, but just purely for inspiration. and if there's a different function to, some sort of grip. So I think of like all different grips as tools. And if I haven't used them before, then I want to get some inspiration and see how they're being used. Whereas back in the day, I was kind of looking for a step by step. So nowadays, more function based.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a place, I reckon, for instructors to still look at instructionals. And I think Big Dan, he was like, how can you, coach without being up to date with the latest techniques? And I feel like as a coach, you can be. It's just the way then you would design your practice. Instead of, designing it step by step, you would try and help, guide the students and help different skills emerge.
Well, Dan's introduced somewhat of a contradiction, right? Because you can either think that all the jiu-jitsu knowledge that we have right now is full and complete, and there's no way to optimize. Every technique has its proper way to do things, and case closed, we're done. Let's get on with the sport. See if you can do better. That is very naive to me. Things are popping up all the time. New things are popping up all the time, and that eventually permeates through the whole culture, and everyone's trying and doing it. So it's exciting in a way, and because of social media and just with the nature of our community is now, that there's all these ideas and stuff sharing, and I'm all for it. So I don't encourage my people to watch or not watch instructionals. They're always coming in with ideas, and we're in a not to say we figure out, we have all the different positions in fighting, and we play. There's only 2 or 3 things, generally speaking, that are how would I say it, useful or efficient from these positions or places, and that's what we focus on, and we play around that.
From your previous podcasts, are you still doing? I remember you're doing like a 15-minute workshop before the actual practice session. Is that still going on?
Yeah. So our practices are generally 45 minutes, and we have this 15-minute break in between our foundations class and our next programs, where it's just people are either getting warmed up or our classes start sharp. We feel we've been able to squeeze an hour and a half of learning into 45 minutes, and so yes, we still use the workshop. But again, it's taken me a long time to get here. This is only unique to our gym and our people. But I think we've got a pretty good culture now. When people come out through the foundations, have a general idea of how we train and what we're looking for, and then that's it. It's up to them now. They come in, they pick a problem to work on, and they get to it. We're very, very big on giving our athletes autonomy here, but they have to be. We're constantly telling them to train intentionally. And that, what does intentionally mean? It just means I'm coming in today. I'm working on this particular problem.
Have you experimented with maybe longer classes, an hour and a half? Or 45 minutes, bang, bang, every minute's a prisoner. And I've used that quote in class, every minute's a prisoner. I was coaching some younger coaches and like, what? And I explained to them, every minute's a prisoner. Taking all of them.
Every minute should be a prisoner. With the 45 minutes, a lot of we run 3 sessions a night, so people either come in and do 2 or 3. So they're still getting that the volume.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so do multiple sessions, fair enough.
And then
in Australia...
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, in Australia, we used to have this franchise called F45. Do you ever have that over in Australia?
Yeah.
But essentially, so it was, 45 minutes, hard workout and get out. The thing is now, F45's kind of gone out of business.
Oh, yeah.
So you're bringing it back, Scott.
No, maybe F45 for fighting, I guess. The F for fighting.
F for fighting, yeah, there's something there.
I mean, especially with the foundations class, it's physical, we there's usually one of our trialists at least once a month barfs, and they either sign up immediately or we never see them again. But it's physical, it's demanding, and I think for newer people in the sport, 45 minutes is plenty.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely.
And when we look through the lens of every minute being a prisoner, it tends to here's me good because I'm once you get me going, I don't stop. But in class, I try and keep the chit chat at the minimum. That's what we say. If I'm less yapping, more scrapping.
Oh, less yapping, more scrapping. I haven't used that one. I've used less yapping, more tapping. Less yapping, more scrapping.
If it rhymes, it must be true, right?
I like it. Less yapping, more scrapping. I've used for the kids, less yapping, more slapping. They like that one. I like it. Less yapping, more scrapping. Bang, bang.
Here's what I have found, which might be helpful, and I think this maybe addresses one of the concerns of the ecological approach. Because we have some classes, so we run our foundation classes at night. If people are not spending enough time in foundations, then they go into the more intermediate advanced classes. They're a little lost on the basic. As I said, there's if we take jiu-jitsu for example, side pin, I think it exists. Side pin, half guard, mountain work. There's 2 or 3 strategies that we're always playing around in, and that's what our foundations program is. We just introduce these strategies as a foundation. I don't like the word fundamentals. I try and avoid that, but we introduce it as a foundation, and then they can go on and have more, how would I say, the capacity to add on to that. What I will say, and this is a bit of a concession, if people skip that stage and they try and go too fast, or they haven't kind of, I'm careful for the words I use, internalize or whatever, they're not really tuned into these kind of strategies, that can be a problem. And I think they end up developing at a much slower rate. So the foundation class is really important, because when we get to our advanced class, this is basic knowledge of and knowledge about that everyone should know, and they can play within that. Because in advanced classes, we don't like to stop and turn every advanced class into a seminar.
I think, yeah, that applies to all sports. Could be, maybe if you've never played, have you heard of a sport called lacrosse? Do you guys have, imagine you got that in America. For me, I didn't even know it was a sport. So if I was to jump straight into a lacrosse game, I would have no idea what I'm doing, the rules, my place on the team. So having that little intro session just to kind of feel out and see what's going on. So I can, definitely see how that's important for new students.
And we've got this, I think it's from the traditional martial arts and the kind of Mr. Miyagi shite that can't seem to leave us. I like looking at sports like skateboarding or snowboarding or stuff. These kids are just out there fucking around and sharing ideas. Oh, that guy did something cool, I'm going to try that. And they fall off 200 times and they eventually pick it up. And it's so obvious when we look at it. This is how humans learn.
Yep. Let's go through another point I've got from the debate. So Greg was saying, a lot of the top other sports, they're, using ecological dynamics. And then Dan and Tom were saying jiu-jitsu is just too complicated. It's too complex. There's too many things happening. What are your thoughts? Do you think jiu-jitsu is too complicated?
No, I think it's complex, of course. But again, if we think about the different parts of the game, there's definitely ways we can simplify things. I hear this a lot, right? My sport's different. I think the only sports that I think would lend to more of a prescriptive nature are ones that are judged aesthetically. So think of gymnastics, any kind of routine-based things that they're getting judged on the aesthetics of their technique. And this is interesting. Coaches, generally speaking, we fetishize technique and getting the right form and that. No one gives a shit about that on game day. We care if you win. We care if you were effective. And this is what Greg's screaming. He cares about effectivities. Is it effective? Is it functionally effective or not? And I think that was where they were getting caught up in yesterday. I'll grant all day, every day, that there's better and worse ways to do things. And if we start just looking at there's better and worse ways to do things, I think that frees up a little bit of this necessity to be so rigid.
Yeah, I can see why people feel like, all this research doesn't apply to jiu-jitsu because it's so complicated. I feel that a lot of students and athletes just make jiu-jitsu complicated. The more I've been training, it seems like the more simple the games become. I know back in the day, if you're trying to collect, 1,000, 5,000 techniques, then it is pretty complicated. But, end of the day, you've got passing, you got sweeping, you got standing, you got pinning. And it doesn't sound overly complicated. It's don't get me wrong, it's a hard sport, but, we don't have to overcomplicate it.
Right. And then we all know this, right? It's been doing martial arts for however long we've been doing it, that you tend to, I don't know whether you pick a style or you pick a set of moves, skills that, I don't know, you're picking them or they're picking you, depending on what your body type is or your interest. This is the fascinating thing with this whole, more of the philosophical side. Where does, why are some moves seem to just talk to me more than they'll talk to you? Or if a coach tells me something, how come sometimes it's in one ear and out the other, and other times I'm like, oh, that was great, and I integrate that into my game. Again, mentioning Greg, that's what we're saying. We don't know. It's very mysterious in many ways, and I think ecological approach appreciates that complexity and that mysteriousness, but it respects it too.
Yeah,
I don't know if that was helpful.
No, it definitely is a mysterious the way we learn. And I guess the more the research getting out there, hopefully we got some jiu-jitsu PhD students that are going to do some jiu-jitsu studies using ecological approach versus, information processing. That would be pretty cool.
It would be, but I think, and this is what I'm hearing from the academics in the space, ecological studies they're quite hard to do because, again, it's really difficult to control for everything. So that's why you find a lot of sports scientists coming out of these labs with finger tapping exercises and this and that. It's not easy to do. So when someone's the comment yesterday was, well, is there any of this been done in jiu-jitsu? And perhaps there hasn't been specific. I know there's been some research and that done on boxing and affordances and range management and stuff. But it's just not easy to do these kind of studies when you're taking the big picture, because what do you control for? How do you control for? And what do you ultimately take away from it? So
you might be the guy to do it, Scott, if you can do the PhD.
No, above my pay grade and what I can afford right now. But to your point, information has never been more accessible than it is now. And again, I'm going back to Big Dan. I don't blame Big Dan because he's young, and the fact he doesn't know this is completely forgivable. Me, it's really not his job to do that. But you can also, maybe of AI, of ChatGPT, they're getting smarter every day. Ask it some questions. Come in a little bit more prepared. That's all I'm asking my guy.
I like Big Dan. I love watching him fight. He's good style to watch.
Yeah, and I think we have to get away from this. Of course, it's a metric, and you can say, well, oh, Scotty, well, where's all your champions or whatever? You don't have them. That's why you're saying this. But I think that's a dangerous metric to cling on to, who was a champion. Because if we study outliers only, or we use outliers as a metric for success, I think we're missing the bigger picture. Like you said, every minute's a prisoner. I think a better metric would be how quickly, minute for minute, are students developing. And that's also difficult to quantify, right? But I think that's a better metric. So, and excuse me, I keep going back to Greg. One of the charges he gets, right, is that, well, these guys, the DeAndres, the Cobra brothers, they came with him. They already had their basics and their fundamentals and whatnot down. Okay, so he can't win. He can't win anyway. But what we have to appreciate too is the guys coming out of the big gyms. There's a draw. Danaher B team, committed sperm lottery winning athletes are going to that place with full time to dedicate themselves. It's one, you would have to try really hard to fuck that up. And secondly, of course, they're going to produce the best athletes. They're starting with the best athletes. They've got the first draft pick. They've got the pick of the litter. So that's why I'm not hating on it. I wish they were all coming here, but I think it's a dangerous and misleading metric.
Yeah, a lot of these athletes are super motivated. I was listening to Big Dan's story. Like, he was saying he would public transport 2, 3, 4 hours. That's one way to Danaher's. So these athletes, I guess, they would do well with any type of approach. Even if I taught them, they'd probably still do pretty well, to be honest.
Because they're driven. And what is that telling us? That is within the individual and their personal interactions that's driving this.
Yeah, well, was there any other big things that came out for you through the debate, or anything you wanted to have a chat about, Scott? Or anything that you're playing around at the moment with your room? I'd be interested to see and to hear about that.
Well, I'm more on the MMA and striking space, which I think is even further behind in many ways. And actually, I'll take that back. I think MMA is pretty progressive. I think because MMA is a newer sport and people are, there's all kind of different coaches and thought leaders not coming in and trying to integrate it. I think MMA is inherently more lively and less prescriptive anyway. So that's a positive. I think striking's still stuck in the dark ages.
Yeah, what we like to do on this show, we like the coaches to run through their lesson plan from the previous class. So if you don't mind, Scott, could you let us in on some of the secret sauce? Give us that play-by-play, not necessarily minute by minute, but just a bit of a rough guide, just so we can kind of have a chat about that.
Okay, my last class. So I think my last class was a foundation striking class. Do you want me to go through that?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so I can bring, now we spar on day one. So if you come in for your free trial, you've got gloves and shins on, you're getting punched and kicked at right away. We don't allow head contact. And all the thing, like the bad habits, charging them, I don't care about that. What I'm looking to do right away is start building some very coarse-grained perception-action relationships. And that means you're in front of a live partner and they're trying to do something to you and you are interacting and on the fly, live, in an unpredictable manner, and you're dealing with that problem. So we need to scale that way down for beginners, right? If you bring a beginner in for the first trial and they're getting their head snapped back and whooped, that's not it's not very conducive to learning or very good from a business. So let's get back to that. So 45 minutes we start. I'm going to start them off with, so I'm looking for some stability and introduce some general mechanics in the warm-up. So it's an extended 10 to 15 minute warm-up. That could be so the other day I'm walking through it, they'll get in the stance. I don't care kind of what stance they're in. Oh, this is another thing. Sorry. I don't know how. I told you, keep me going. I'll be here all day. Do we really need to tell someone how to stand?
For me, I don't think so. It's it kind of organizes itself.
Organizes itself, right? So that's the thing for me. Footwork, especially rudimentary footwork when you're starting, is just not falling on your ass, right? Your feet are organized around stability. So when we start playing these games, they're immediately starting to develop a little bit of stability, moving back and forward with a live partner. And we only use 10 strikes in our foundations class. We have 2 looping hooks, so a lead hook and a rear hook to the shoulder of the trunk, and then we have our straights, jabber across the chest, and then we'll have our 2 push kicks, our 2 low kicks, and our 2 body kicks, and play around in the space. So when I'm introducing it to new people, I might say, okay, for a kick, I'm looking for 2 things. I'm looking for a lift and a turn. And we'll play around that space. One side will be practicing that, either a switch kick or a roundhouse, so as a lead or a rear. And I'll tell the defenders, just imagine you have 2 big shields. It just block your shield. So very, very sparse, right? Very, very, very basic stuff. And we'll go through that as a warm-up. So over time, the compound effect of lifting and turning and perceiving and reacting, that starts to build. I don't worry about technique because that would be foolish because it takes a long time to come. And I don't worry about failure and frustration. So scale that down, we go through our warm-up. So that'll be a kind of progressive warm-up. We'll introduce some different kind of games where there's always kind of a attack and defensive component. And on Friday, we were working on switch kicks. So I'll introduce a switch kick. Why do we switch kick? The reason we switch is because the payoffs on the rear side, blah, blah, blah. Again, I said try not to talk too much in class. And then we'll introduce a switch kick and a couple of ideas. So we'll have one person's practicing the switch kick, one side will be blocking, and they'll be returning whatever they want. Whatever you want, right? Just do what feels right at the moment. And then there's always a bit of decision-making going on there, right? That is picking up when the strike is coming and reacting to it in real time. And then we go into our, so that will be our first 15 minutes. We go through what the kind of theme of the day is going to be. I'll put a bit more focus on that. And then for us, and it just cuts down on my chatting, we use this 1-1-2 system or game that we play for the next 15 to 20 minutes. That is, both sides will always be boxing. It's not real boxing because they're not hitting themselves in the head, but they're using their arms, they're pawing, they're moving around. And then one side and one side only is trying to land that switch kick while they're boxing. So you're getting the opportunity to box and you know it's coming, you're not sure when it's coming, and you can start just, again, creating these very, very coarse-grained, this relationship between someone's trying to kick you, you're knowing, you're kind of paying attention to when they're kicking, and you're able to couple your action to that. So that's round one, we'll immediately go into round two, which both sides are boxing, the other side's doing the switch kick. And then we will, the last one, so the 1-1-2, both sides will be boxing, both sides trying to land a switch kick. So this is the way I integrate, I scale things down. So there's not low kicks and side kicks and spinning kicks coming. You're playing in this kind of dynamic little boxing game, and you'll have these switch kicks coming. What is that doing? That's helping the attacker start to pick up on these opportunities to throw that switch kick, and it's letting the defender pick up the opportunities to defend it. And then we can scale up and scale down from there. We can add different things, we can add more variables and whatnot. And then towards the end of the class, we just go into a free play spar. And I don't worry about it too much because no one's getting hit in the head. So out of the 5 years we've been doing this, there hasn't been any injuries. There'll be some rolled ankles and whatnot, and but for the most part, no injuries. And we'll have a play spar, and I'll say to them, you have to throw, maybe a 90-second round, you have to throw at least 3 switch kicks here. So again, now the variability goes up. So through the class, we start from low variability, increasing the variability towards the end. But the whole time it's been live, it's been unscripted, it's just been scaled down.
I like it. Sounds like a fun class. That's a good 45 minutes.
I'd like you to critique that.
Yeah, put me on the spot there. So it's hard because I, to be honest, I run a very similar class, and I've learned a lot from you. With the warm-up, let's say your students, like, I know for me personally, I have to come to class at least 5-10 minutes early and do my own warm-up. Or a couple of, my knees playing up a little bit, my back. So if a student is coming, they've got some injuries, do they get time to say, coach, I'm just going to sit out this warm-up, I'll do my own thing?
Yeah, of course. If no one's ever coerced to they can take breaks, they can jump off the side. Whatever. I'm very, very conscious of the experience of learners, not to be too over. Now it's overwhelming to an extent, but I don't want it to be overwhelming or a sense of hopelessness and danger.
And then, so this is for your foundations class, I imagine?
Yes.
Yep. If I was, to be honest, I wouldn't push back on it at all, but if I was to push back,
yeah, please do.
Would you find, so that they're doing that in foundations, do you find that they don't have that much creativity moving on to the general class because they're only being limited to the 10 different, movements?
Well, within that 10 different movements, within the switch kick, there's a myriad of ways to throw it. There's a myriad of ways to defend it and counter it. You can catch it, you can block it, you can high block, you can all this stuff. So I think there's enough variability. I mean, in MMA striking, there really isn't that much more. We can categorize things and say there's 50 different types of jab, but really it's a lead hand, right?
Yep. Yeah, no, definitely there.
And so my pushback to anyone saying, well, they need to learn the technique, and so striking especially is, for me, is happening so quickly. It's pure perception action coupling, and I've been doing this. I posted some YouTube videos recently when I've been slowing down high level fighting to around 20% speed, and I encourage everyone to watch fighting. Where are these fancy techniques, these muscle memorized moves? I don't see them.
You're definitely not seeing them with Yuri Prohaska, DDP, Pereira. It seems like the more unorthodox fighters are the most successful fighters.
Right. Why?
They're most adaptable. They have that variability. They can change on the fly. If you got someone like Adesanya, that polished technique, if something comes up they haven't seen before, he might not be able to adapt.
Bingo. I think that's what it is, and I think that's why a lot of these unorthodox fighters, they're presenting different information. So this is another key idea within this. If we create an ecosystem where I'm sparring with 10 different people and they're all behaving differently, that's a challenge for me. But over time, I'm going to adapt them. I'm going to see, Big Dan mentioned it yesterday, right? They go into the subject of invariance. And I felt bad because Greg gave him just enough rope to hang himself with. And Dan was making the point that, yeah, well, everyone does things differently, but they do a lot of it the same. That's invariant, son.
Yep. There you go.
So in a
I like it.
Sorry, go ahead. I don't want to.
Oh no, wasn't going to say anything too important. You keep going.
No, so that's why we're seeing guys like Sean Strickland in that, right? Sean Strickland, yep. I'm an enormous fan. You look at, I don't know Sean personally. I haven't been in the training room with him, but from what it appears to me, he's in a bunch of different environments, and he's armed. Now, is it for longevity and health? Is it the optimum way and the way he spars? Perhaps not, but he's become extremely effective. And you can watch with Adesanya, especially Sean Mishka and I did a podcast just on that fight, and I wasn't that surprised. Of course, I don't think I would have bet my house on Strickland beating Adesanya, and I think Adesanya, there could have been a bunch of reasons why he didn't perform as well that night, but he looked lost in there. He looked lost. There was a novelty that he hadn't prepared for, and I think this is the last time I mentioned Greg. Honestly, what we do as coaches is, I got 3 fighters fighting this weekend, and if they go in the cage and they don't perform well, that was my fault. And it was my fault because I haven't prepared them for that level of novelty. So we're trying to get as much novelty into the practice as we can. So when we get to the performance, that novelty or that unexpectedness isn't there. Of course, you're going to compete against people who are just better, right? That's just going to happen. That's the nature of the game. But my job and a coach's job should be to make them somewhat immune to novelty over time.
That's probably what led me to, be such a big fan of the constraints-led approach and ecological dynamics. Because I know in competitions, in jiu-jitsu comps and even karate comps, I'd be, drilling something, because I used to be a big driller as well back in the day. And I'd come across something different in a competition and I just couldn't problem solve it. And I remember writing down, key learnings from the comp, problem solving, and then finding constraints-led approach and ecological dynamics. It just helps the athletes become better problem solvers because they're doing that on a daily basis.
Yeah, and to your point about, I fucked up before. We had a fighter a couple of months ago who went into a fight. I think he won it, but I think he should have won more handedly, more easily than he did. He got stuck in the guard, and he got caught in a couple of triangle and armbar submissions, which he's never been able to fight his way out of. But the reason I fucked up there is because I don't have we don't spend a lot of time in someone's full guard in MMA. And if we are, I don't want my guys in full guard in MMA. If you're on your back in full guard, you are losing the fight. It's very, very difficult to sweep someone from the guard in MMA. Most people know what they're doing. They have a strong base. It's just not that easy. So what we focus on is the guard's just a transient thing. We're trying to get the inside butterflies or whatever so we can elevate and escape. And I think he spent so much time expecting someone on the bottom to be getting inside position and escaping that we hadn't spent enough time dealing with just being in MMA and someone's close guard who wants to keep a hold of that and spamming. So that was a reflection on me, and that informs how practice is going to go. So we've been spending a lot of time in the guard now, and with the emphasis and the intention not to get out of that position, but to stay there and explore and get experience in that.
How did he problem solve his way out of those submissions? I'd be interested to hear.
A little bit of stubbornness, and it was lucky. He was lucky, but to the point, and I think it was a close fight. But the reason he won was because the kid on the bottom was on the bottom, and this is something that's really important to me in MMA. You have no business being on the bottom. Yes, there's caveats. You can pull off submissions or whatever, but if you're in MMA, I want you on top. And I think 40, 50 years of MMA have proven that is that's the way to effectively win fights. Push someone on their back, smash them.
That's it. I got another one actually for you.
Yeah,
I got another one for you, Scott. Just popped up. So, how would you? Well, if you had to design the perfect experiments, to test ecological dynamics versus information processing specific to jiu-jitsu, what would it look like? What would the constraints be for that? To put you on the spot.
Well, I like the question. I think it's because I've run that thought experiment a few times. I think, first of all, it's impossible because ecology says you can't information's ever present. It's always out there. I think you would need a third cohort, right? So you would have your all live, your all static, and then you have people who did nothing, right? So, and that's something I don't think we appreciate enough. And they do this in science, right? We're good science. So you have your 3 cohorts, and then you put them through some kind of transfer test, whether that be a grappling match or something at the end. I think the live people will beat the strict static drillers, but I think the strict static drillers will beat the people who did nothing. So it's telling me there's a little bit of value in this, or there is value in this. The interesting discussion is, how valuable is it? And I think it's completely reasonable. And I'm a little, like when we said before, sneaking some of it back in. Bear with me here. We have our traditional model, which is an element of static drilling and an element of live. And we're saying, could we control for just static and just live? Perhaps you could. Then a good question, I think it's interesting, and I think it's completely reasonable. Does a little bit of static and a little bit of live, does that work synergistically? So do you get more out of it at the end? So only doing static or only doing live, does doing a bit of both create a better product at the end? I don't have a definitive answer for that. I tend to lean to more towards the live stuff, but again, I think there's probably a reasonable case to be made that there is a little bit of synergy going on there. And like you said, if you can get a couple of reps just to kind of give you an idea of what to look for in tension, that could help the development long term. So if that makes sense, if any of that makes sense, I'm slowly leaving some room for that. But what Greg is running an experiment, he's not allowing any room for that because he doesn't want to muddy his experiment. And I can appreciate that.
Yeah, he's fighting the good fight. I guess he doesn't really care about the commercial side, so I can definitely appreciate that.
Well, that's my last question. How do you commercialize this?
I know because our karate school, that's where we've got the bulk of our students. For our jiu-jitsu program, for me, I personally do not care if we make money or lose money. So yeah, that's so for me, it's purely I can experiment because I'm not banking on it literally to make any money. I've got a lot of students who are my mates, they train for free. So it's purely a hobby. So we got 5 nights a week. So that's where I can experiment. But it would be hard if that's, if that's your full-time gig. It's hard to experiment. You're making this much money and then,
right.
You're going to take a risk, try a controversial approach. And then, maybe you can't afford to pay your mortgage. It's a tough one.
That's a great point that we can maybe start finishing off here. So I can tell you're itching to get me out of here. But
no, it's all good. Happy to have you.
If you have one of these athletes that this is their dream, right? And I'm not talking about the kid who comes in and wants to be UFC champ. You have a real dedicated athlete. That is an enormous responsibility for the coach to not fuck around and waste his time. So I see even at the higher levels now, coaches get names and whatnot, and people are drawn to them. And if these coaches aren't doing their homework and really putting in the due diligence and time deserved to make sure that they are not wasting their students' time, I think that's just a responsibility that anyone who wants to be in the coaching business should take seriously.
Yeah. I can see Big Dan looking into the research. Like, he's so intelligent, he's around, the best athletes. I think eventually he's going to read, maybe one of Rob Gray's books or, look at, Renshaw's, textbook. I feel like, he's going to eventually read it.
And this is already happening. There's this kind of 2 camps at the moment, right? And they're fiercely fighting, but I don't know whether the over and window it's shifting. We are shifting more towards this more playful live setup. There's definitely having an influence because, like back to the original, no coach admits that they do the 15-minute shrimping and the bear crawling and then the meticulous 3 moves and 2 rolls. I don't see anyone saying that that's what they do. So there's already that's kind of baked in that they're kind of already drifting towards the message. And I think that was a part yesterday when Tom spoke about his class. And I think, for the most part, it sounds exactly like I'd run a grappling class. We do our warm-ups through standing engagements and whatnot. And then we pick a theme, we'd work around that. And then we do a lot of the starts and resets from that position. And to say it's not I'm fine calling it situational drilling or situational sparring because as long as it's somewhat authentic and people are exploring and trying to advance or progress from a certain position, that is fully in line with the ecological approach. Not necessarily the constraints-led approach, but it's fully kosher as far as ecology comes. Self-organization, direct perception, all that, blah, 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 blah.
Awesome. I think that's a good way to wrap it up, Scott. So thanks so much for taking the time. I'm a big fan. I love your podcast. Always refer people to listen to your podcast. So good to have you. And yeah, guys, if you enjoyed that, let us know. Make sure you like, subscribe, check out all the content. Check out Scott's Primal MKE coaching podcast. So that's good stuff there. We'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks, Scott.
Right, my man. Lance, all the best. I appreciate you having me. Thank you.